So hello, today we're going to be doing the textual analysis of the passage in chapter 20, beginning in your books on page 181 to those who have looked at Rome, and finishing on the next page 182, well wadded with stupidity. This passage is situated in book 2, which is entitled Old and Young, and follows book 1, where Dorothea was the eponymous heroine, Miss Brooke, and in this second book, she is now the young bride to the older Mr. Casaubon. The passage is situated in Rome and takes place during the honeymoon of the young married couple, or newly married couple, I should say. At the beginning of chapter 22, Dorothea is seen in her inner room or boudoir, sobbing bitterly. Sobbing bitterly because disappointed by her marriage, but also unable to make sense of what are called at the beginning of the fourth paragraph of chapter 20, the stupendous fragmentariness of bridal life. She can't make sense of it. She doesn't understand. It. That sense of lack of understanding is also expressed in the epigraph, or what George Eliot called the motto of chapter 20, which reads, "A child forsaken, waking suddenly, whose gaze doth afeard on all things round doth rove, and seeth only that it cannot see the meeting eyes of love." And this sense that Dorothea is a child, she's referred to as a girl in the passage, who suddenly awakes and has a realization, is informed by our passage as well. And of course, the fact that her eyes do not meet love, that is the disappointment that she is experiencing during her honeymoon, and the realization of what married life is. So the passage is situated, as I said, during this honeymoon. She has only been married for a month and a half, for 6 weeks, as we are explicitly told in the passage under study. The disillusioned bride comes to the realization that she is disappointed in Rome, and Rome therefore acts as an interpreter of herself. And that expression interpreter is used on line 3. And in a first part, I would like to show how Rome is that interpreter for Dorothea. It is a foil to her, or what is called a background on line 11. These line numbers are referring to the line numbered version of the text, which I have uploaded to the platform as well. Following a discussion of Rome as a background revealing Dorothea's state of mind, I would like to look at Dorothea herself, and Dorothea, who as the new bride is, I'm quoting from line 20, facing a new real future which replaces the imaginary. And after focus on Dorothea, the bride, the passage and my analysis shift to the narrator, who engages in an ontological reflection of human nature, on what it is to be human and to feel sympathy, empathy through one's sensitivity for other people. And that third part could be called a reflection on all ordinary human life. So to begin with, Rome as a background or as an interpreter. It's important to note that we have moved from the provincial town of Middlemarch, of which this novel is a study, to Rome, Rome, which is a capital. It's an imperial and papal city, and also, as we're told on line 3, the spiritual center and interpreter of the world. And it is this new world history center, this new alien world, as it's called on line 16, where Dorothea comes to a realization of her state of mind and of her disappointment. Casaubon has chosen Rome as the place for their honeymoon because he has work to do there. He's pursuing his sterile scholarly research. And while he pursues his sterile scholarly research, he leaves Dorothea, we're told on line 27, as a young nudity to make sense as best she can of the incongruities into which she has tumbled, while her elders go about their business, and the plural there, of course, covers the singular figure of her husband, Casaubon. The narrator introduces Rome to those who can look at it with the quickening power of a knowledge which breathes a growing soul into all historic places, and because of that knowledge and understanding can then trace out the suppressed transitions which unite all contrasts. Those who have looked at Rome with that knowledge include the readers, but do not include Dorothea, whose education proves to be lacking. She's been educated in Switzerland. There's reference on line 5 to the Swiss Puritanism, which she has acquired. She has been fed on meager Protestant histories, those meager, thin, not substantial histories have not been enough to give her the knowledge that she needs to understand the transitions, to understand the gaps that there are in order to unite the contrasts and make sense of it. Elsewhere in the novel, we are told that the education that she and her sister Celia had received was a toy box education. And so Dorothea is suffering from this fragmentariness. I'm going back to the quotation that I made earlier, to the paragraph preceding the passage that we are studying. And she suffers from the contrast between the Protestant Puritan upbringing that she had, bringing with her the Calvinistic hostility which she would have felt towards papal Rome and the Catholicism of Rome. She does not understand the resplendent past of Rome because what she sees now is its degradation and degeneration. She sees Rome with its sordid present state, which is a state of poverty and of squalor, and given her social concerns, Dorothy would have been moved by that, and she does not see the splendor of its grand past. It remains unintelligible to her. We are told on line 10, Rome can be unintelligible. For her, it is overwhelming. It is titanic. We're told on line 14 that there was titanic life gazing and struggling on the walls. The vistas are long, they're large, but those marble eyes of the statues belong to an alien world, because what Dorothea is experiencing is the vast wreck of her ambitious ideals. Those ideals have been dashed. Her illusions are lost. And she is not able to experience the sensuous and the spiritual that she had hoped for. This experience is one of violence for her, and that's expressed with the fact that she felt jarred with an electric shock. And we're also told that on line 9 that she was plunged into tumultuous into a tumultuous preoccupation. And that tumultuous preoccupation is brought about by Rome and this overpowering sense of its vastness, its hugeness. The vastness of St. Peter's is referred to on line 23 with its huge bronze canopy and the mosaics of the prophets and the evangelists, which were excited. Above all, it's Christmas time, and Rome is being decorated with red drapery, deep red splendor, which seems to spread like the disease of the retina. And that disease of the retina plays into Dorothea's impaired vision. We know that she's short-sighted, and she can't see things, can't always see things clearly, which explains her inward amazement, referred to on line 26, and the bewilderment that she has at the nudity of around her and what she sees around her. So Dorothea is unable to make sense of this titanic life, which is unintelligible to her. And the narrator says that the weight of that unintelligible Rome would, although it weighs heavily on Dorothea because she has no defense, she's defenseless, it would lie easily, it would be taken easily by bright nymphs for whom it would only be a background of a brilliant picnic of Anglo-foreign society. And that reference to the nymph, I think, is contrasting Dorothea implicitly with Rosamond, who is often referred to as a nymph. So Rome and its vastness, and the vastness of St. Peter's, is the background for Dorothea's revelation. This passage narrates a stage in her development, in her education, in her coming to terms with reality, part of what is called her Bildung, the German word, which of course also means a building. So the buildings of Rome, the construction of Rome and its history, which is now in ruins and degradation, is the background for Dorothea's revelation, which brings me to a second part on the new real future which she faces, which replaces the imaginary. And that is a quotation from line 30, the new real future which replaces the imaginary. The dashed dreams of the young Dorothea. The young Dorothea with her ardent nature, who had enthusiasm, we're told on line 9. She enthusiastically accepted the untried duty which married life involved. Significantly, on line 14, Eliot uses the verb divorced to refer to Rome, the deep degeneracy of the Christian center has now only become a worshipping of superstition, and that Rome is now divorced from any sense of reverence for the Catholic order, and that verb divorced, of course, is in keeping with Dorothea's own state of mind at this particular stage. So as I said, it's an experience of the marriage, and is an experience for her which is great disappointment, and a disappointment which is felt as in violent terms. She's jarred by Rome. It comes to her as an electric shock, we're told on line 17. And in fact, she becomes numbed by it. She almost can hardly feel for a bit. We're told on line 18 that Rome urged itself upon her, producing an ache which belonged to a glut of confused ideas. She couldn't make sense of them, which checked the flow of her emotion. Rome is a revelation for her. It is an eye-opener, and that optic imagery is one which is developed throughout the novel, and specifically in this passage with recourse to the magic lantern, the pre-cinematic mechanical instrument, which projected images onto the wall. And those images onto the wall, which of course are virtual images, are the images of Dorothea's dreams of what her married life will be like. That magic lantern is linked to a psychological phenomenon here, her loss of illusion, her disillusionment, and that disillusionment for her will be imprinted with images of Rome. And the narrator says that on line 21, our moods are apt to bring with them images which succeeded each other. And we're told that, like the magic lantern, when we doze, when we are in between sleeping and waking, those images are like magic lantern images, which will be imprinted in Dorothea's memory, and they will fix themselves in her memory, we're told, lines 19 to 20. And when she's not expecting it, this strange association, a kind of involuntary memory, will trigger off the images, which will be then projected for her in her mind's eye. That sense of the wreck of her ideals has spelt a loss of any sensuousness and any spirituality. We're told on line 16, those ideals which were sensuous and spiritual are all lost, leaving her in a state of dull forlornness. And so she's forlorn, of course, because she's neglected by Casaubon, who leaves her lets her tumble out amongst the incongruities, we're told on line 27, and leads her to her own inward amazement. She's left to, if we go back to the motto, she's left with her gaze afeared on her own, to make sense of it on her own. Although she does not have the tools necessary to interpret what Rome means and what marriage means to her. It is a moment of revelation for her, and one could liken this revelation to the moment in tragedy which is called anagnorisis. However, I think we need to take that with care because the narrator marks a certain ironic critical distance with Dorothea, and that will bring me to my third part, which is the intrusive narrator, which we feel in this passage in particular, but all throughout the entire novel. The narrator who engages here on a reflection of human nature in general, having taken Dorothea as a case study of that, or kind of springboard into that study. And the narrator is going to move from a close-up on Dorothea to a wider vision. The close-up on Dorothea, which, as I said, marked a critical distance, Dorothea is actually belittled by the narrator. There's a sense of condescension towards her when, first of all, she's referred to as a girl, and we're told that she had enthusiastic acceptance, as if she couldn't control her emotions. We're also told that she only had a very small allowance of knowledge. She isn't thoroughly educated, and even her principles, which we're told were quickly, her actions quickly fused into the mold of her principles. It's almost as if she adopts principles without thinking about it, and that her ardent nature seems to be somewhat criticized here. But moving from Dorothea to humanity more generally, the narrator talks about our moods on line 21, which associates humanity at large in these ontological reflections on the human condition, and of course on what it is to be what it is to be man. We get here a kind of panoramic view of man, And we can think again of Lydgate's interest in the heart and its sistis diastole, the contracting and expanding of the heart. We move from a narrow optical vision to a much wider optical vision. And that those reflections on mankind in general lead the narrator to the conclusion that Dorothea's state is actually not one of tragedy. It's a state which is, we're told on line 26, not exceptional. There was nothing very exceptional about it. A notion which is repeated on line 30 when we're told that her state of disillusionment is not unusual. The narrator concedes, lines 29 to 30, that one can experience some discouragement or some faintness of heart when the future does not live up to the expectations of the imaginary. But that is not actually an element of tragedy. It's not an element of tragedy because it is, we are told on line 32, too frequent. And mankind, the narrator concludes, has a coarse emotion, a rough emotion, not a highly sensitive emotion, not an emotion which is attuned to all of the suffering and all of the feelings of others. Because if our sensitivity were heightened, if we had a keen vision and a keen sense of hearing, there would be our empathy would augment to such an extent that our frames could hardly bear it anymore on line 33. Indeed, it would even lead to death. We would not be able. We would die of an oversensitivity, too much attuneness to suffering on the part of others, and that conclusion is expressed in the last two sentences of the passage, where we have a close-up. We've moved from the world history of Rome to a close-up of a blade of grass. And if we could hear the grass grow, or if we could hear the heartbeat of the squirrel, then the silence of the natural world would become a roar, and that noise would be overpowering for us. So as a result, the quickest of us walk well wadded with stupidity. And there, Eliot means the quickest of us, the most alive of us, those of us who are most attuned. We walk about well wadded, well covered, well protected, like cotton wool around us, with stupidity. And stupidity there doesn't mean a lack of intelligence or a lack of knowledge or education, but that our faculties are deadened, they are numbed, we are benumbed. So we don't hear, we don't see, we don't smell, we don't feel with the great intensity that one would need in order to empathize with Dorothea on the level of tragedy. So the passage, as the rest of the novel itself, illustrates the limits of human sympathy and sensitivity, and shows us that the empirical senses are not enough for us to make sense of what's going on. We also have to deploy the mind. So we also have to look upon Rome with a power of knowledge which breathes a growing soul into its shape. So we need to combine our sensitivity with our intelligence and with our knowledge. And this is a lesson of Eliot's on what she calls ordinary human life, indeed all ordinary human life, the not very exceptional, the not unusual, the ordinary human life, which is the basis, really, of her reflections in Middlemarch. This lesson, which is delivered by the narrator to the reader, is one that she comes back to throughout the novel, but specifically in the terms in which it is relayed here at the time she narrates Featherstone's funeral in Book 4, Chapter 34, pages 305 to 306. And there, Dorothea is attending the funeral from the first floor of her married home, and that funeral awakens certain memories and certain sensitivities in her. And we're told right at the bottom, page 305, that it was like the vision of Saint Peter's at Rome, which was inwoven with moods of despondency for her. And that sense that it was inwoven with moods of despondency is that magic lantern of memory, which is working for her and projecting the image of St. Peter's on her mind, which is associated forever, we're told, coming back to our passage where we're told that memory is imprinted forever with these images. Of course, the passage in line 34 goes on to develop the point, which is that the scenes that we experience individually partake of a greater human experience, and that the scenes which make a vital change in our neighbor's lot are but the background of our own. And there, that word background brings us back to Rome, which is only a background. And again, in this novel, we have constantly this sense of how things are interwoven or how they work together. I hope that's been helpful in understanding this passage, one of the richest in Eliot's novel, and certainly the last two sentences are ones that one needs to commit to memory. If we had a keen vision and feeling of all ordinary human life, it would be like hearing the grass grow and the squirrel's heart beat, and we should die of that roar which lies on the other side of silence. As it is, the quickest of us all walk about well wadded with stupidity. And in a textual analysis, it would be pertinent to deploy your literary skills and point out the alliteration in grass, grow, and of course lies, side, silence, that there's a kind of hiss of silence, and although we don't make any sense of that hiss of silence, there is meaning behind it, or there's feeling behind it, Eliot says. But notice also the monosyllabic rhythm, the grass, grow, heart, beat. And notice also the alliteration in that we walk well wadded, which almost benumbs our senses, bringing about that sense of stupidity, as I said. All the best.